Okay, guys, so shout out to Mr. Lloyd Allen for posting in one of the Facebook groups and wanting to know more about the Spark tab table. So we're going to go through a Gen 3, 4, and 5 file and kind of explore this Spark Advanced General tab. I'm just going to briefly go over the biggest thing being the corrections, what you should and shouldn't change, just kind of based on your needs. So this is a 2000 Silverado 5.3 file, which is what a lot of you guys are playing with. And again, we'll go to a Gen 4 file and then a Gen 5 here in a little bit. So this Spark tab is pretty simple, which is one of the kind of the hallmarks of the Gen 3s, which is kind of nice. So if we look here in this general section, there's not a whole lot that really needs to be changed. In this file, Spark smoothing is already set to disable, which is good. So if you see that it's set to enable, if you read it down here, master enable disable for the RPM derivative spark control, manual trans spark smoothing. You just don't want the computer to have any more authority to move the spark timing around, especially with you big cam guys, which a lot of us are. All these settings right here, you don't need to really mess with these. You can just leave those as they are. This high octane table is where we're going to be spending the majority of our time. If we click on this, this is what it looks like, kind of in our dual plane mode. We have our idle region kind of down here. We have our wide open throttle range out here. This is kind of our cruising range up here. Don't be nervous by these high numbers in this 0.16 in the lower area. This area right here is going to be deceleration. So you're going to be on the throttle here when cruising, and then briefly as you accelerate kind of in this area, this is the area right here where you're going to kind of get into trouble, where if you've got this cranked up too far, that you'll start to kind of ride your knock learn factor and it'll learn down. A lot of you guys that are towing, you're gonna fall somewhere down in here, so you want to make sure you don't crank these up too much. You don't want negative values. That's kind of a different story. We're not building a file right now. We're just kind of going over things, but you spend a lot of time in here, decent amount of time in here, at least people like me who daily drive their vehicles. And then when you stand in it, you're going to be somewhere probably like 0.8, and depending on where you're kind of falling, with your RPM, you're probably going to be somewhere in here. You forced induction guys might get into this 1.0 and above, but naturally aspirated guys, you're probably going to be somewhere like right in here. Generally speaking, on pump gas, 16 to about 26, 27 degrees on the high side is where these LS engines can operate. Again, that's on the throttle. That's when you're on the throttle. That's kind of the range you want to be in. All this stuff is off the throttle for emissions purposes, so you don't need to really worry about it too much. If you watch a lot of my videos, copy the high octane to the low octane, paste it, and then 8 degrees is a good safe spot. These numbers look really low, but there again, if your wife puts really poor gas in it, or you have to put fuel in the car and you don't have an option but 87 octane, this just helps to keep you safe. We'll undo that real quick. But to answer Mr. Lloyd's question, these base corrections are going to be adders, okay? And you want to make sure that you have control and understanding of what these are for, especially if you're trying to, really pump some timing into here and, and make some power. So we'll just kind of start over here. Obviously, this is not a flex fuel capable vehicle. The big one that you want to edit is this air fuel ratio spark advanced correction. You'll notice this is based on engine speed on this side, and then this is probably going to be cylinder air mass load up here. This is the table that you always want to come in and zero out. You don't want to be dumping. If you notice those numbers, if you're relying on 17, 18 degrees over here, and this is adding spark to that, you're going to be way over time. So this is a table that we always tell you to come into and zero out. You just don't need it. We'll skip down to EGR. A lot of you guys are deleting your EGR setups, so you can zero this out as well. Catalyst heating, kind of the same thing. There's really no need to yank that timing out. You can control all of that via your high octane table. Intake air temperature. This is going to be an adder or a subtractor based on your intake air temperature. So whether you're using your stock mass airflow sensor that has your IAT sensor built into it, or you've done a breakout and you've gotten an IAT sensor closer to the intake manifold in the throttle body. I've got a log here. This is a big cam Z06 Corvette, and I've got intake air temperature here, engine coolant temperature here. if you notice, even at, when he's really on the throttle, 6,400, these guys are actually in Canada too. But even down here in the Mississippi Gulf Coast, unless you have a really weird, funky intake setup where you're just sucking in hot air, the last thing you really want is, and so we'd be operating somewhere here. So we're in the safe zone. But for a naturally aspirated car, I would come in here and do something like this just to kind of get that out of the way. And then I might blend just to lighten some of these up. And if you're anywhere over here, and notice that this is only happening at a higher manifold, higher mat pressure. So down here at low load, it's not happening. But down here is where you're going to be on the throttle. So it's going to be ripping some of this out. Honestly, if you're naturally aspirated, even if you're forced induction and you're getting up in here, you want it to pull this much timing. But something like this is going to be perfectly fine. And if you're nervous or scared, you could come in here and you could do like a 0.75 and take 25% out. And honestly, if you're even really nervous, you just leave it like it is, just until you get things kind of dialed in. Obviously, if you were a forced induction setup, like a turbocharger or a positive displacement blower or a procharger, you would probably want to leave this in place and get your fueling dialed in. That's a separate video. We're not talking about that here. And monitoring this before you go in and just start chopping that stuff out. So, again, especially down here when it's super hot and forced induction and pump gas, you'd want to be err on the side of caution. Engine coolant temperature, these often look kind of different. Sometimes you'll see these axes reversed. Again, you have cylinder air mass up here and you have engine coolant temperature on this side. This one looks like at a lot of the lower coolant temperatures, it's pulling timing out. I would tell you to go in here and zero this out. You just don't really need that, especially if you have a camshaft. You're going to be fighting yourself because you're going to need a little bit more timing to get that vehicle up and running. If you notice down here though, at 203 degrees Fahrenheit, that's normal operating range for these LS motors. Really it's not until 221 that range that we like to start pulling it. So I would personally come in here and do something like this, and at the 221 range, you can start ripping it out. Again, if you're surpassing that coolant temperature, then you're not concerned with making power. You're concerned with pulling timing and saving what's happening, which is you're probably hurting something. There again, you could leave this in place. You'd be perfectly fine to just leave this like this is if you're concerned. Maximum torque, the MVT, maximum brake torque, you don't need to touch this. Leave this like it is. It's perfectly fine. Idle spark advance for small cam in park, this is going to be just fine. Depending on the cam size, in drive, you may have to come in here and bump this. That way, when you kick it into gear, you've got just a little bit more advance to keep control of things. Over and under speed, this is where you can get the ghost cam from. But if you're using a big camshaft, this might be a little too much. Again, that's a different video. Typically what I teach you guys to do, if you have a really big cam, is you can come in and do something like this. The amount that it's allowed to swing. And then I would probably come in here and make this positive 15. That would control the spark just a little bit more. Cranking spark, this is going to be just fine, unless you have a really, really big camshaft, and we can go over that in a different video. But typically speaking, that's going to be just fine. This is a table that I really like to use. Typically, I'll zero out down here. There's just no need for it to swing that low. And then -5 is usually a good number. This will allow you to leave your torque management and your transmission side in place, and it just doesn't dip so low and throw you forward in your seat. Maximum spark advance, we don't ever need to really touch that. Those are kind of what you would do here in a Gen 3. If we move over to a Gen 4, there's a little bit more control. Let's do a 2007 Denali. So looks a little bit different, a few more tabs, but again, a lot of things that you don't typically need. There you go, spark smoothing is disabled, which is good. Don't need to touch any of this. High octane, this looks pretty similar. Definitely a little jagged. You know, I may come in here, if this was a base file I was doing, I may come in here and just hit the smooth button a couple times to try to smooth it a little bit, but your spark table is probably not going to look like this. You're definitely going to have to pull some timing out here. You may have some bucking and some surging. You know, so a lot of you guys have deleted the DoD stuff, so you don't need to mess with those. If you're like this truck has a virtual flex sensor, so we would not populate this table. Only recommend using an actual flex fuel sensor. Again, this gas table, you could come in and just zero that one out and you'd be fine. EGR is not used, it's already zeroed out. The IAT table looks pretty similar, it's just reversed now. Now you have intake air temperature, cylinder air mass. I would probably tell you to come in here and zero this out down low. And then if you wanted, you could leave this like it is. Or maybe do something like this. Again, if you're in this 122 range, you know, you've got something else going on. But this is totally appropriate. You'd be just fine. ECT, don't really need to add anything down low. This would be okay. And this is already kind of set up pretty all right. You could log this and see if it's pulling timing out. And that, again, we can do that in a separate video. This is just kind of how to show you how to set it up. If you've done your VC, if you've gotten rid of the variable valve timing, you would want to zero this table out. The timing numbers that it can swing. Catalyst heating, typically this gets deleted. Whoops, oh, I missed one. There you go. Something like that. Cold launch, we don't typically touch that. Maximum brake torque, we don't touch that. These fuel MBT correctors, we don't ever touch those. The EGR adder, it's already zeroed out. Idle spark, these are typically a little bit lower. You know, this is probably okay. Coast down, you know, you may want to increase these numbers just a little bit. Again, if you have a big camshaft, you have a stock camshaft and you don't have any need to do so, but that would be okay. The idle spark adders, park and neutral, we don't need to touch those. Over and under speeds typically aren't touched that much in Gen 4s, honestly. I don't ever really need, I could usually get what I need from the coast down table here. Cranking spark, these -10s are kind of weird. If you have a camshaft, 7 is kind of the generic number to use. That way you're just not fighting yourself. Startup flare, we don't need to mess with that. This max retard table, we don't ever mess with that. The minimum spark table, this is one of my favorites. You can leave your torque management, your transmission alone, and you can just set these values to 0 and then just kind of blend this down and go out and drive. And usually this will be a really good, you know, place to be at. Reduce power and torque management, we don't need to touch that. That's a Gen 4. If we go to a Gen 5, we'll see that it's pretty similar to the Gen 4 with just a few minor changes. Over here to engine, let it load up. Spark advance, yeah. So this is kind of similar. This side's very similar as well. You know, so you would kind of set this up the same way. You know, if you just installed a camshaft, I would probably see if I can smooth the table with 1 or 2 clicks. And a little trick I like to use is that when I copy this over, if you have a big camshaft installed, when you copy this table, if you start to learn from your high octane to your low octane, and you have too low of values here, if we select this table and we hit -8, depending on what camshaft you have, these values may be a little low. So what you can do actually is leave this range alone and just come in this area. Now it's going to make your timing table look a little funny, but that's okay. But if you leave this area alone and you don't subtract this 8 degrees out, then if the table starts to learn down with a big cam car, you won't be writing small numbers, and sitting in traffic with it kind of stumbling and falling on its face, which is what it'll do. Okay. No need to really mess with the piston slap. Again, your base correction, this is the only one you need to come in and mess with. If you're using an actual flex fuel sensor, then we can utilize this table. This is not exactly set up the way that I would set it up, but again, we're not talking about flex fuel tunes right now. IET and ECT tables are the same, and you would follow the same rules. Yeah, they're really trying to pull it out early here. Same thing with, again, and they're adding, it's like they're adding Spark willy-nilly, so we would definitely want to come in here and zero that out. They also introduced this humidity table, which I believe uses maybe like mat pressure and then the intake air temperature from the throttle, from the mass airflow sensor, with some algorithm in the background to try and calculate the humidity. So a lot of people will tell you to leave this in place. Again, especially if you live in the southern states in the summer, maybe you could leave this like it is and just see where you fall. A lot of guys will tell you to go in and edit it. I would probably just start with the IAT and the ECT and call that good. Your VCP Spark, again, you would zero this out if you were doing a VVT delete. If you notice here, the cranking spark table looks a little bit different. I probably am not going to edit this. Your startup airflow is going to take care of firing the vehicle off. NVT we don't touch. These corrections, the EGR adder, we're not going to touch these. It's not even used here. If you notice here, if you alter your minimum spark table, whatever you do, make sure you copy it and you paste it to your long term. That is a difference, so make sure you do that. This multi-pulse spark we don't touch. So a little bit different. The Gen 5s have a better way of controlling idle, so you don't have to set base spark, in park, and in drive and things like that. So I think it spends more time writing this this high octane table, which is a good thing. So again, thank you, Mr. Lloyd, for reaching out and wanting to know more about these Spark tabs. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. The membership program is up, so make sure you check that out. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. My email is in the comment section. And yeah, we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks.